Thank you, Suresh, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to renew my friendship with ActionAid, with the AITUC through Comrade Amarjit Kaur, and with the academic world through Professor Sham Sundar. It's indeed quite a challenging agenda to even encapsulate what all labor reforms are going on. And that's the reason I volunteered to focus on it, just one such code. Well, one reason why I could pick up the wage code is above all because it has already become law as compared to the other three which are waiting in the wings. But encouraged by Professor Sham Sundar's remarks, I'm going to try and take the minimum possible time in order to refer to the other three codes also at the outset so that an overall picture is available before the audience. So far as the Industrial Relations Code is concerned, I think the biggest damage that this code does is to the long-standing institution of collective bargaining. I don't think those who are in power understand that collective bargaining helps even capitalism, that the golden era of capitalism in the Western world is actually built around collective bargaining. And we know that if you want collective bargaining, you must have a trade union which is worth its name. And so when trade unions raise their demands and sign a collective bargaining agreement, then wages goes into the hands of the workers. And when wages goes into the hands of the population, it creates purchasing capacity. So if you want to overcome the present crisis, the most important thing they must recognize in terms of pure economics, it's not socialism or communism. I repeat, in terms of capitalism, if you want capitalism to pick up, especially friends in UP and Madhya Pradesh, they seem to have a feudal point of view and want to develop capitalism in their states. They are sadly mistaken. That's not how political economy works. So what does this law do? It seeks to replace collective bargaining with arbitration. I would go so far as to say arbitration is like privatization of dispute settlement. And that cannot be an alternative for industrial relations. And the worst thing they do is that they put a pabandi, a big kind of a restraint on the right to strike. Can you believe it? India may be perhaps among the very few countries in the world which has now made the right to strike illegal. You should take note of the fact that if the present law goes through in its proposed bill form, then the right to strike will become, you can't have a legal strike in India. You can't be a part of the ILO and take a view which is so absurd in its nature. It goes a step further. If workers go on strike, then the union can be deregistered. So if you take all this together, you understand what the Industrial Relations Code is dealing with. Fortunately, during the recent period, I think, some people are advising them that this sounds very crazy. So the right to recognition is brought in. But while the right to recognition is brought in, they're afraid of the secret ballot. And so they remain silent on it. But they go ahead to say that if you want to be a sole negotiating agent, you must get 75% of the votes. By what democratic standard can you impose 75% mandate to run an institution? There would be no government in India after independence if you said that the minimum mandate required is 75%. Let alone this government. No government, even in the past, had that kind of a mandate. So this is an absolutely undemocratic proposal, and I hope that before they bring it to Parliament, they'll have second thoughts about it. They also do away with the technique of reference. It's an important ingredient of the Industrial Disputes Act, and I'm not sure whether they understand the consequences of such steps. I leave the Industrial Relations Code at that. If you look at the Social Security Code, how should one summarize that is a question that comes to my mind. I'll do it in the following manner. If you take the Employees State Insurance, along with it, if you add the Employees Provident Fund Act, then it covers 9 standards that the ILO has laid down as very good social security standards. And what does this code do? It simply says that 93% of the Indian workforce will not be entitled to the social security measures. So what kind of social security are you talking about? You can see the consequences of that when you look at the condition of migrant labor. There's more to it, but for lack of time. If you look at the third code, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, I think the most outstanding feature of it is the most outlandish feature. And that is that you have discarded the global standard of 8 hours of work. Amarjit Kaur referred to the history of the agitation for 8 hours. Convention number 1 of the ILO in 1919 deals with 8 hours of work. In 1942, Ambedkar, I think it's 46, I'm sorry, Ambedkar as Labour Minister in the Viceroy's Council, he moved an amendment to make 8 hours work the standard, and that is how we had won those rights. That is sought to be done away. And even worse is the idea that it will not be the legislature which will decide what is the hours of work. It's left to the delegated legislation. It's left to prescribed government's action. And that is actually against the principles of administrative law. That is what the Supreme Court called as abdication of legislative function. It's for the legislature to prescribe policy. You can't leave it to the administration. The biggest syndrome in all these 4 codes is that the legislature backs off and then leaves it to the administration to do what it wants. So that is the whole process of trying to prepare codes. I think the sad part of it is that India has had a very advanced labor jurisprudence. And I'm not going into the rest, but this is true in the field of wage determination as well. So the purpose of writing a code, is in order to bring all legal instruments on a particular subject together. In fact, the grand codes go even beyond. I suppose the grandest code is, code of Napoleon in 1804. And that's a code which seeks to bring together not only civil law, even criminal law. There are similarly during the Hammurabi Code, it's also referred to as the Babylonian Code. There's the Code of Justinian, which brings together Roman law in 529 BC. There's the German Civil Code. There's the Swiss Civil Code. There's the Japanese Civil Code. So in other words, I'm saying the process of writing a code, I think, has been misunderstood by our friends in India. They are not talking of a code of that nature. They have descended on labor. And I don't think there are countries in the world which have written a labor code. And I suppose as they attempted to do this, they realized that they have to have 4 labor codes. If you believe really in the process of code replacing legislation, why didn't you think of 1 code for the whole of labor law? You realize that the manner in which India has won these rights is very different. When it comes to labor, you have to respond to local conditions. You have to make sure that you understand the nature of the industry. You must find out what are the profit margins. Some of the workers who get the highest wages in India, they may be, consuming only 1% of the turnover of that industry. If there is such a huge profit margin, why should you say that they shouldn't get a decent wage? And you have to consider what is the nature of labor. You cannot afford to ignore the conditions of migrant labor when you are proposing labor codes. They've done that. This is not an example from the air. The Interstate Migrant Workers Act is proposed to be repealed. And that shows the insensitivity. Do you think a labor code can take care of the problems that arise when you have to deal with a specific question like the interstate migrant workers issues? It is to be remembered that the law that exists now, especially even now, because Parliament has not yet acted, it brings together existing practices. Existing practices which have been modified through collective bargaining. Collective bargaining involves the energies of so many sections. It's not just the trade union. Some of the best representatives of Indian capital sit across the negotiating table. Is the chief executive of the company, the finance director of the company, the person in charge of marketing, the person in charge of production. That is how a collective bargaining agreement is arrived at. And if India has done well in industry, Bangalore is a place where industrialization has been very successful. I can tell you, all the best industries in Bangalore are also the ones that have signed the best collective bargaining agreements. Through good collective bargaining agreements, industry has done well. They've been able to pay 20% bonus. And so this idea that destroying such a lovely framework is necessary for industrialization is crazy. It's ill-informed. There is a great labor law jurist who is recognized across the world. His name is Otto von Freund. And he makes a statement that the individual contract of employment is replaced by the collective contract of employment. And that is labor law's greatest contribution to world jurisprudence. So it's that kind of a thing which is sought to be reversed. We have had adjudication. We have had the Labour Appellate Tribunal. We have had so many commissions. The Royal Commission on Labour, the Gajendra Gadkar's Commission, the Second National Labour Commission, the NCEUS. We have had judgments of the Supreme Court. We have had so many tripartite conferences. Amarjit Kaur referred to some of them. You see, the last one was the 45th National Tripartite Labour Conference. What is a Tripartite Labour Conference? It brings together the captains of Indian industry. They are not ill-informed people. And then the trade unions and the government. And they arrive at unanimous decisions. The 15th Indian Labour Conference lays down the standards for arriving at the minimum wage. How can you simply ignore all this and think that we can go ahead? I think one way of capturing it is they've developed a fetish that they must write codes. And as a result, they have attempted this crazy thing. And 90% of what they have reproduced in these codes is cut and paste. And a hopeless cut and paste job for the reason that the earlier laws were framed within the framework of a social welfare state. Whereas now you have moved to a neoliberal state. And so how can you cut and paste from, during the period of neoliberalism from the earlier period? And this results in contradictions, which are, glaring contradictions when you look at the type of legislation that's coming through. Let me then go on to examine the Code on Wages. I wanted to get into the details of at least one code. And for lack of time, I thought I'll do this because of the importance of the wage question. And I repeat, the importance of the wage question is, it's not only important for working people, for the working class, it's also extremely important for the country. There is nearly unanimous opinion that the demand side must be stimulated. And the finance minister of India is unfortunately stimulating the supply side. And we've seen the result of it. It's not producing anything. How can industry produce if there are no people to buy? And if you want to buy things, please address the wage question in a more intelligent manner. There is no correlation between political economy and labor law reforms which are being bandied about. It's very sad to note that, you know, even if you look at the wage code, what does it do? It brings together Payment of Wages Act, Minimum Wages Act, Equal Remuneration Act, and Bonus Act. That's not even exhaustive of wage determination in India at present. How can you then call it a code? The expression code is a misnomer. They are not aware, is it, that wages in India is determined by collective bargaining, by conciliation, by adjudication, by wage boards, by arbitration. So all this is forgotten. So it's a very strange attitude that we see. Be that as it may, I want to go a step further into analysis of this code. And I therefore pick up the crux of it. The crux of this code is that it introduces two types of wages. One is the minimum wage, which already existed under the Minimum Wage Act 1948, but it also introduces the floor wage. So while I have this criticism of labor law, here is an aspect which I will welcome. Let me say very clearly, I welcome a floor wage. And this legislation proposes a floor wage. And the law says it can be either a national level floor wage or it can be for different geographical areas. Be it so, that's a very welcome idea. But while saying that minimum wages will continue, this is the problem of cut and paste, in my opinion. They have decided that you don't need scheduled employment. Anybody who is familiar with minimum wages in this country knows that a minimum wage is notified in respect of a scheduled employment. And over the last more than 60 years, the Minimum Wages Act has brought into effect schedules numbering nearly 2,000, a little less than 2,000. And so that has happened across so many states in India because it's the appropriate government which decides to notify a schedule. And under that schedule, a minimum wage notification is made. This strange law, it repeals this provision. And at the same time, you see their dilemma. They say, even if we arrive at a floor wage, we will still make sure that the existing minimum wage is protected. That's the right step. It shows their unresolved contradictions. But they're not able to say that in future notifications of scheduled employments will continue. So not only does this law say that the appropriate government must fix minimum wage, it goes to the extent of saying that you can use the methods that were prescribed under the 1948 Act. And what was the method? You had two methods. One is called the committee method and the other is called the notification method. And if you use the notification method, then you must consult the advisory body. And the advisory committee consists of employers, consists of employees, consists of women, a very welcome feature, consists of experts, and consists of government. Now, what's the idea of creating an advisory committee? That means you say that you need an expert body in order to advise how the wages should be arrived at. And after that you say, as may be prescribed. You want to leave the determination of minimum wages to a method of prescription. This is, in my opinion, clearly illegal for the reasons that I already referred to. Let me come to the floor wage. I said I welcome floor wage. Why? Because not all of employment in India is covered by minimum wages. We all know that. There are so many employments in India which don't get any protected wage. So good, if you can protect them, please go ahead and do so. But what is going to be the amount? The Honorable Labour Minister, I don't know if he said it accidentally or deliberately, he said that it will be 178 rupees per day. Whereas the government appointed its own committee. If experts were, friends from that Labour Institute were there. And then in addition, at the same time, there was a Rangarajan committee. And both these committees, appointed for different purposes, one precisely for wage determination, arrived at 375 rupees. So my caveat is the following. I welcome a national floor level wage or a floor level wage which is different for different regions. Let the concerned state governments come together and fix a floor level wage for their region, but it can't be less than rupees 375. Why? Because your own expert committee has recommended that level after doing a lot of exercise. And the Rangarajan committee, in my opinion, this is something we must take special note of and work on it even more. That was a committee appointed in order to determine what should be the poverty line in India. And I would think that's most appropriate. Will you, for God's sake, fix a floor level wage which will take people above the poverty line? That's a good goal to aspire for. But if you say 178 rupees, then you will push poverty people into penury. You will push them into further destitution. Of course, it looks like the government doesn't care, because migrant workers have been denied wages for now it's coming to about 3 months. Even though the Home Ministry said that they must be paid wages, nobody bothered about it. What are these great employers? Every day they go and request the finance minister to give them more concessions. But never will they say, okay, during this period we'll pay wages to the workers. I think that disconnect, makes Indian capital must bow its head in shame. So we must, I feel, propose an amendment to this code, wage code. And that is in order to also in the interest of our economy. It would be incomplete on my part not to refer to minimum wage, because that's also part of it. But it is wrong for this law to remain silent on how the minimum wage should be fixed. And you don't have to discover anything new. We all know the 15th Indian Labour Conference has laid down all the yardsticks necessary. Those who are familiar with this are so familiar, it would be highly redundant for me to mention it. And so I take it that, I must, however, draw attention to the fact that the 15th ILC, mind you, it's a unanimous recommendation of the 15th ILC, recommended 2,700 calories. Current experts are happy with the 2,400, maybe even with 2,100, maybe go below 2,000 also. But there is an interesting inconsistency. When they talked about the 7th Pay Commission and fixed their minimum wage, they accepted 2,700 calories. Hello, if those who sit in the central government, that is what is described as sedentary work. Whereas those who are engaged in scheduled employments, who work in the quarries and on the roads, they are not even moderate. They are working in heavy kind of conditions. And therefore, for them, 2,700 is not enough. It will have to be much more. So here is another inconsistency that shows up. But, we are all more familiar with the Reptocos case. And I welcome the Reptocos case because it added another 25%. But please note, there is an even more important Supreme Court judgment in India. It is called Unnichoi versus State of Kerala. And that is the only constitution bench decision on minimum wage so far. So you can't afford to ignore that judgment. And that judgment elaborately considered everything connected with the minimum wage. Employers wanted to challenge the Minimum Wage Act itself. The Supreme Court upheld it. And Supreme Court said, you must apply the yardstick of the 15th Indian Labour Conference. They've gone to the extent of saying, if you can't run an industry by paying minimum wage, you don't have a right to run an industry. The tile factory owners of Kerala tried to shut down their tile factory for a few days during this case. But Kerala government did not oblige them. And so the minimum wages was not only paid, tile industry continued to make profits. I'll close at this with just one last observation. And my last observation is, because because we are so angry with this government and its anti-labor practices, there is a trend among us to get into rejectionism. I would caution, don't get into rejectionism. Examine every piece of the stupid law that is proposed and propose amendments to it. We need to get into critical engagement even with these bad laws. And I think in respect of that, you know, we must not only look at the procedure, but also about the substantial content of it. And for lack of time, I won't get into it. But from the point of view of the content, we are in a very interesting period of Indian history. It is similar to the history during our independence struggle. The leaders of the independence movement and the leaders of the working class movement were on the same page. It is a similar period. Those who want to build a new India in which the economic crisis is solved and the trade union is on the same page. And the most important thing is, please address the demand side of issues. It's not a communist point of view. It's a point of view of the most established economists who have been advising even the Prime Minister of India. So it's time they wake up and take a look at all these, because there is still scope for surviving and for developing democratic dimensions in our struggle. Thank you for your patient listening.